lot of just acting, I would call it. Or just being myself is what I would also call it. But welcome to the show, everybody. This is Conspiracy Heroes. I'm here with one of my heroes, and there's a lot of ways to describe this individual. You can use attachment titles like he is the host of the podcast My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. He's the founder of Alt Media United. But he's more than that. He's a truth spreader. He's a researcher. He's a person with a lot of, I would say, heart chakra emanating from his soul and spreading out to the world and changing a lot of people's minds through vibrations, auditorially and visually. So without much else to say, I want to introduce my first guest, Mystic Mark. And to do this, Mark, before I have you say anything, I'm old school, and I kind of visualize me meeting you in person, so I brought you a few gifts here. And the first gift I have is a copy of my book. You can't buy this book, just so everybody knows. It's only available as a gift, and it's copy number 10 out of 50. So I got this book for you. Can't wait for you to read it. And the next thing I got for you, Mark, I bought this for myself. If you watch my Instagram, people will catch on to this. It's a hoodie, tie-dye. I made it myself, creatively. It's a 2XL. It's extra large. It's just supposed to be kind of worn around and enjoyed comfortably. So I got you two things, a piece of art and another piece of art. I guess a book's a piece of art. So my gift to you, Mark, for being here, and I appreciate you joining us. And if I could ask you anything, is there anything you'd like to share with my Patreon community, or like where can they find you? What do you want them to know about you, just to start us off?
Yeah, dude, thanks for having me. I appreciate the gifts. I'll appreciate them even more as soon as they get to my doorstep, but cool, very cool. I definitely want to know what the book's about, but maybe it should be a surprise. Who knows? For your audience, I just want to say thank you for tuning into the Provo Kid featuring Mystic Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, the #1 podcast about conspiracy theories in the philosophy category on iTunes. Because all those other philosophizers, they're not talking about the real shit. They're talking about ancient shit and other wacko stuff. But if you want the crazy lunatic, good junk, you got to go to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. And since you're already on Patreon, go on over. For $3, you could support this lunatic. You're already supporting the Provo Kid, who's, I don't know, by the looks of him, he's definitely some type of lunatic, but I hope I find out more during this conversation. So that's about it. MyFamilyThinksI'mCrazy.com. You can't compete with the title either. We got the URL on lockdown.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And just so everybody knows, I got to clarify, like, why is this guy my hero? How did he get onto Conspiracy Heroes podcast, #1? And a lot of you should know I'm the Provo Kid. And the reality is you grow up in Utah and you start to think differently about anything. Oh, all of a sudden, your family thinks you're crazy. So if you know me, you know my family thinks I'm fucking crazy. It is what it is. And there's a lot of other people who, in my life, have gone through the same growing pains in Utah that I've gone through, where the hardest people to get through are your family members on the ways you think. And so why is Mystic Mark my hero? Because he's been through the same kind of cathartic journey I've gone through. And everybody who kind of thinks at my same wavelength in Utah, where everybody looks at you and like, yo, you're crazy. And then it really starts at your family. Because you're the first, my family was the first people I told, who I'm like, hey, chemtrails, right? And they're like, oh, come on, chemtrails. I'm like, yeah, but they're real. And if you know me, I just shortened the chemtrails argument to cloud seeding. And it's just a lot easier because you can Google it and it's coded into law. Cloud seeding's real. And chemtrails is such a provable conspiracy, but as soon as you bring it up to your family, they think you're crazy. And I'm just so comfortable with being considered crazy in that category. As soon as I heard Mystic Mark as soon as I heard him, and everything about him, I knew, hey, we got something special. And another thing about Mystic Mark, there's a few things I could just rattle off about synchronicities, and I want to hear more. But Mark, my first question to you is, as a conspiracy hero, who are maybe like your short list, 1, 2, or 3, any individuals you want to throw out there that kind of changed you, changed your life, or, like what people who resonated with you because they're one of the, they think differently, they are different, and they're trying to understand not only the world better, but themselves perhaps.
Great questions and a lot of really kind things said there. Thank you, brother. And I'm glad we resonate. That's awesome. I think I've never been to Utah. I have a cousin that moved out there, but I can imagine with what I've learned about Utah that it could probably feel like one big family the way that state's culture is. So yeah, I can see
Definitely.
how being alienated from that can be tough, especially considering it's not like other states where you could just like maybe drive an hour or two and be somewhere else. Like Utah, it seems like the cities are pretty like up there and out there. So I don't know.
Yep.
Definitely relate on that level. I can't say I enjoy the comfort of that remoteness. I would probably enjoy being that remote. I'm actually in Connecticut. But back to your question, my conspiracy heroes. So I talk about a guy that taught me a lot about Skull and Bones, and I've talked about him a lot more lately because of what I've been doing. I heard you mention on episode 46 that you saw I was on the Grimerica show.
Yep.
They're talking about Skull and Bones and a project that I'm working on relating to that subject. So I would say my mentor, who at the time was a homeless guy, was my first conspiracy hero, because it wasn't like most homeless people where they're like, what is it, like epidemic, like what's the terminally homeless, like he has a house now, like he was just at a point in his life where that's made sense for him. And now he has a job and a house and all that good stuff. But yeah, he's a mentor of mine. And then second, this person I always give credit to because it's really deserved, Sam Tripoli, because if it wasn't for Sam, I wouldn't be doing my own podcast and I wouldn't have inspired you and subsequently wouldn't be here. So yeah, definitely Sam Tripoli is like up there. And I remember listening to his show and really being relieved that not only were these things being talked about, but somebody was laughing about them, because you might expect like talking about these things was already hard enough, let alone like being funny about it. Like, so now I'm kind of like spoiled in the sense that like I got 10 or 20 people in my phone that I can message on Telegram or call up and have a laugh with, and they get it because they have a similar field of references to me. Whereas one of my like friends that I made in elementary school that I'm still connected to, we're connected through that bond of growing up near each other. But when it comes to conspiracies, I make like one comment about it and some of them are like, yeah, okay, whatever, like it's like a really weird feeling. It's like farting at like a funeral or something, it's like really, like it makes everybody like, damn, you had to bring that up, like, so. And I don't know, I've never farted at a funeral, so maybe that was a bad bad analogy, but it
still works.
Yeah, that's kind of like top two right there. And if I had to throw a third one in the mix, it would be, and I hope I'm not offending anybody, but Michael Wan, my boy Michael Wan, because I'm his co-host on Your Handbook for the Apocalypse, and yeah, the information, the research he put out about the Susquehanna River really connected with me. And you know who Michael Wan is?
As soon as I hear the Susquehanna River, it takes me back to the podcast. Like, I know who that is. Cool. Oh, tinfoil hat, right?
So yeah, and Mike's been on Tinfoil a couple times, but I would recommend people listen to his interviews on the Higher Side Chats, or just go straight to him and go to his YouTube channel. I actually turned a bunch of his really good YouTube videos into a podcast. It's
Wow.
called Susquehanna Alchemy.
Yes.
And that's
Okay.
what the show him and I do is on that RSS feed.
I
But
need
yeah,
to I need to tap into that. That's funny because, to be honest, I feel like the past 48 hours I've delved into all of your content. It's funny. There's still things you bring that up. Like, I missed that. I
so
missed that.
RSS feed is only like a little portion of like, all right, so here. So if you really want to know
Yeah.
how I got into podcasting, Sam Tripoli and I met at a comedy show, similar to how you met Ari Shafir, I assume. And I had a book, and I also had this like type of fabric that I wanted to give him. And I was like, dude, you put your phone in this fabric, it'll be off from the whole world. You know, it was a Faraday fabric bag that I actually.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, you know what that is. So I gave him one of those. I gave him a copy of The Kabbalion, which is a book that he's talked a lot about since. And it was funny because he booked somebody on his show to talk about it. And I kind of thought to myself, like, I wonder if this was inspired by like me giving him that book. So I had reached out to him on the Patreon and whatnot and messaged him and whatnot. And he would answer back and he would always kind of be like, yeah, we'll have you on the show. We'll have you on the show. And it was like, it was just busy. It never really lined up.
Yeah.
But eventually it happened. And I told him all about Skull and Bones instead of the Kabbalion. So then he was interested in knowing more about that. We just kept it going. And I did a couple more Patreon episodes with him. And then from there, he had a spiritual podcast that he was starting. And I was going to be the third guest on it. And at that point, I had a podcast called The Bud Triangle, but the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
And The Bud Triangle was just corny. It was just like me and my buddies, like in a house, in a room, just fucking around. Like, we would like, invite our crazy friends over and interview them, you know? And, go ahead.
Is the budding to your career?
Well, yeah, the concept was to be like three dudes in a triangle smoking bud and talking about conspiracies, but it's never good to have to explain the title of a podcast. So when I rethought my podcast title, it was mostly because Sam was like, what's the name of your show? And I told him, and he's like, what is that supposed to mean? And I'm like, that's not fine. So that's when I kind of was in the market for a new name for the show and also a new like concept, because Zoom had become like a thing because of the pandemic, you know? So people were just doing Zoom regularly, and I'm like, well, shit, instead of like bringing my friends together into a room, let's do it over Zoom. It's way easier. My friend doesn't have to leave his house, that lazy bum, you know? And we made it happen, and it was pretty cool, you know? I did a bunch of shows, Idiocalypse, which I don't think it really exists anymore. I was a guest on like Lindsay Sharman's podcast. I was a guest on Sam Tripoli's podcast, Tinfoil Hat, and that was like the big, you know, Aleister Crowley episode. And I'm kind of skipping over something. So when I went on Sam's Zero podcast, he encouraged me to start my own podcast, but he also asked me who he should have on his show next.
Yeah.
And I sent him like a 30-person list, you know, like, oh, have this guy, this guy, this guy. I even included emails for some of them because I had a feeling that he would be, you know, too lazy to go and search them out.
You're a real homie, dude. Real swarm.
Yeah, this guy's like, he's like, oh, damn, this guy's legit. So one thing led to another, and Sam asked me to start booking for him. And next thing you know, now I'm booking for Tinfoil Hat. And that made it really easy to connect with people like Alex Garris, who is a host of the Skeptical podcast, and then him and I did Alt Media United, kind of jointly started it with his help. I kind of founded it, and we put this idea together. So yeah, it's all kind of just come together. And I mean, geez, from the Union of the Unwanted to the Grimerica show to Macroaggressions to Tinfoil Hat, I've done a lot of podcasts, and then now I'm the co-host on the Free Thinker Society podcast.
Yes.
So if you go and look that one up, you can find me there. And so, yeah, I think that puts and then obviously Illuminati confirmed, but that's
Yeah,
on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy feed. So
I love it.
little confusing, but I think people get the hint. And some people are like fans of your handbook for the apocalypse. Some people are like more fans of, tinfoil hat, and they like me from there, and they
Definitely.
support me on My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. And they tune in for like the more conspiracy heavy episodes. But I think our show is more of like a synchro mysticism type of show, like the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, whatever synchro mysticism means to you, because I think it has different meanings, but it's synchro mysticism applied to my life and perspective. Because what happens is,
Mm-hmm.
in the process of learning information and finding guests to talk to, there's a thread that develops.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it started when I let my boys go. I said, homies, we're done. This is not working out.
I like that. Yeah, yeah, no. I got something for that later.
It was all me and the boys, and we had guests on, and the problem was is like they were too wild, and they didn't want to. They didn't want to know what the guest was about beforehand. They didn't want to do any research, right?
Yeah, it's too hard to work with other people because, yeah, I know that feeling and I talk about it often. It's easier to sometimes just make it about what you want. It's easier to do it yourself.
Well, and that's the nature of any creative venture. Is
Yes.
To another podcast host yesterday, we drove down from where he lives to work on something with me, and he was, he's in bands and stuff, and he's like, yeah, podcasting and music is basically the same thing. It's all like, one person kind of, well, I said this, but I was like theorizing, and he kind of agreed with me to some degree. But yeah, there's like this sort of creative tyranny that needs to take place, where like one person kind of has to be the conductor and really
Yes.
the lead. And if everybody's not sharing that vision, and not everybody's seeing that, music that the orchestra, what's the guy called, the conductor,
Mm-hmm.
is playing, then the whole orchestra goes to shit. So that's kind of where the show really started. I mean, people can go back and listen to the first 40, 50 episodes,
Yep.
and maybe they'll enjoy them. But I think like the show really hits its stride when it's just me. Occasionally, I'll have a couple different friends on as co-hosts, and my girlfriend Tara also joins me depending on if she likes the guest or not. And then yeah, it's just really kind of evolved. Like episode 80, the show sounds way different than if you listen to episode 120. Just because like the progression of like, oh, okay, now this many people are supporting me, I could afford to use this tool, great, now I'm going to edit this way, and you also learn how to do things from other people as time goes on. And
Certainly.
the show's kind of really hit its stride in the last like 20 episodes.
And I think it exemplifies, I don't know if the term's didactic, but like just self-learning, like how much you learn by yourself when you undertake an endeavor. Because people are like, how do you learn how to do a podcast? How do you do these things, Provo Kid? And I just said, you do it. And you don't stop. You just do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it.
I was that guy who was like, driving a bakery van, delivering Amazon packages. I had 2 jobs, 2 different shifts throughout the week. I would do bakery shifts in the morning, and then at 10 a.m. I would go and do Amazon shifts in the afternoon. And like for a long time, I was like, oh, I could be doing a podcast, because I would just listen. And to your point about autodidactic, like I think that is what podcasts are so good for, is because there are people out there who just binge these shows and learn a lot, because getting paid to do it. They're like, on the clock doing whatever mindless job they have. And it's not mindless anymore, because they're able to put a freaking headbud in or earbud in and tune into something. And I think that is what's so cool about podcasting, is like I experienced what that was like on that end, and I fell in love with the medium, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So not any slight against maybe people who've been doing it longer before you could like really appreciate a podcast, but like there's a certain skill that you have when you like listen to something a lot. Like I think some of the big podcasts that everybody likes, the thing is like those are first gen podcasts. You know, I think my podcast, and no offense to anybody, is like second gen in the sense
Yep.
that like I've listened to a bunch of first gen conspiracy, spirituality, alternative podcasts, and I'm like taking the blend of what I like from all of them and then also molding it into what I want to make with a podcast and using the best of all in this like Tao of Jeet Kune Do style, you know, like Bruce Lee talked about, you know, not having just a karate black belt, like go get a blue belt in jiu-jitsu and then get, you know, 3 years in judo and then go do kickboxing for a couple years and blend all those things together. You know, that's kind of what I think people can expect to hear when they tune into my shows. Like a little bit of the energy you might get on Tinfoil, a little bit of the laid back energy you get on Grimerica, you know, the detail that Greg Carlwood brings to his show, and then some other weird stuff that could only come from me, because it also has to be authentic. And that's what I liked about your offer and your invite, is like I could tell you're owning who you are. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of podcasts out there who are just like, oh, we're the conspiracy shit show hour or something, you know, and it's like, you know, they're trying to be like something they're not, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like, and even right down to what you're doing now with this series, however many episodes it is, it's like these are your conspiracy heroes. This is you getting real with, you know, me and whoever else you
Yeah.
pick. So don't let me ramble on.
No, dude. That's what I'm honored, bro. I'm here to listen to you, dude. This is what I wanted.
Well, really, I just want you to ask another question so I could light this one.
Here's another question for you. So, as I've done some of my research on you, as weird as that sounds, and because I wanted to find, I would guess, some of the synchronicities we've had in our own lives, and I'll bring up a few of them. One of them, we both wrestled. Another one is we've both done martial arts, and another one, synchronicities are funny when you look at them, dude. Your facial, like I had the same facial hair you had today. I'm like, oh, if I don't shave it, they're gonna confuse us. Like they're gonna think we're twins, maybe. Like, and then it's funny, we're wearing the headband, so there's just so many things between us synchronistically that.
Are you acting? Did you really shave your face just for this podcast?
I'm like, I needed to create
How fast does your beard grow back?
I don't know, maybe I don't know.
Oh man, dude, you shouldn't have done that. I could have put my Hawaiian shirt on, and we could have been like waiting over here. I could have like put a green screen, and you would have green screen. Nobody would have told the difference between us.
That's what I'm saying. And so one of the biggest synchros I've found is our love of books. And so when I first started making any content, the premise was I wanted to share my love of books. So my first YouTube video is me doing a book review of all the books I read. And so that's what started me on my creative career of just, I guess, on YouTube and everything. Just I wanted to share books. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this because typically I think in the conspiracy community, if you want to call it that, or there's this mindset that the Eastern philosophy has kind of the dominance on meditation. And I bring this to the table, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, but when I think about reading, I differentiate that between listening to an audiobook, because when you read, it's akin to me to meditation. If you read a book, you're not doing dishes. If you read a book, you're not listening to someone. If you read a book, your concentration is on typically a set of words, a thought pattern. And if it's a Bible, guess what? That to me is meditating on Holy Scripture. And so to me, a lot of times people in the West or Western mindset feel as though that, meditation has never been afforded to them. In fact, I think it always has been, and it was a different type of meditation style because it's focused on meditating on other people's words rather than your own thoughts or belief system. So as the power of meditation through reading gained influence, there's been I would say, let me get to my question. My question is this. What are your thoughts on reading and meditating? Have you ever read something and achieved some sort of like aha moment, just like you would, I guess, if you were meditating, right? And I think the same things happen. So my question boiled down is, have you ever read a book and felt as though like it provided an answer to you were looking for in the same pathway meditation affords some people?
Yes. Great question. Sorry I got up. My banner behind me was not down, and I didn't want the street lights to be a distraction because the cars passed by. But anyways,
God
to
bless
answer
you.
your question, let me take a deep breath and meditate on that because it is a profound question. So when it comes to reading, when I was a kid, I only wanted to read about like nonfiction stuff. I was very when I was real young, I liked fiction because the books were simpler, you know. But as I got older, the fiction books became like more complicated, and I just wasn't able to like sit in someone else's shoes for whatever reason in that medium. I could do it if I was watching a TV show or a movie or whatever, but like that like perspective that it requires to read a book in someone else's words, it didn't click with me.
Yeah.
I would go for like nonfiction. I wanted to know like every single animal. I wanted to know like all the weird animals. I wanted to know like, every single like type of one animal. I
Yeah.
was getting like into like classifying things.
You read to
Uh,
learn.
yeah, I love to learn. I love to create like a view of the world. That's kind of like I wasn't happy with like an incomplete picture of the world. So as I got older, I kept exploring that different facets, whether it was natural history, regular history, the history of war, the history of espionage. I got into that at a really weird young age. Like that's not a topic that a normal middle school kid is into, like what are spies doing and shit. So maybe not in my time period. There's
Yeah.
no like, cool spy movies other than Spy Kids came out, so maybe I'm not that strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Spy Kids was a big one for me, and I
That movie was red pilled. It was like believe in yourself, work hard, like
dude,
you
and
could
there
do
were
anything.
still red pilled movies like that out in the '90s, so there was kind of this like flavor of Gnosticism that I had picked up on through pop culture and mainstream media. But it really wasn't until I started smoking weed that I had the patience and the curiosity to read for more extended periods of time and more conceptual things rather than
Yep.
just like matter of fact, this is that sort of things. So when that happened, that's when the books behind you or behind me that you see behind me really kind of like doubled and tripled and quadrupled, and that's why I changed the camera angle because I mean it is an investment, so I like to show it off. Why not? But
And it's heavy too. Books are heavy. Like you, and I
it's
always like to equate this for
bro.
people who don't understand that. How much does a mind weigh? You try to lift every book a person's ever read. Their mind should weigh a lot. And
Damn,
you know what I mean?
I
Like
like
you,
that.
it
Yeah.
should.
I know, and for people out there who are like, "Oh, I can't read," like that's how I felt. Like I
Hmm.
was not a strong reader by any means, but for whatever reason, I would like. I really liked smoking by myself rather than just with my friends because that's how I got into it. The homies were like, "Oh, come smoke," and the first time I was like, "Nah, I'm a wrestler. We don't do that. We're
Yeah.
straight edge. We don't fuck around with
I
any
didn't
types."
smoke when I wrestled either.
Yeah, I was like, well, I did, but it wasn't until like, because I was a wrestler from sophomore year to senior year. I didn't do
Okay.
my freshman year. I didn't do anything freshman year. Um, but yeah, and then like halfway through sophomore year, after the wrestling season was over, I started smoking weed, and yeah, I only really did it because I heard rumors that Bruce Lee had smoked weed and used weed, and I was just like, well, if Bruce got that jacked and that diesel at fighting, and he was on weed, then why can't I be on weed? So I smoked and I enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed like because at first it was fun to like joke around and talk shit with my friends, but it wasn't fun to like. You ever like zone out and you're with your friends and you're like,
Oh,
and then they start to think you're a weirdo or something. So
how about this? They won't stop playing the same video game for 4 hours, and you're like, what the fuck
yeah,
else are we gonna do?
yeah, dude. So if that started happening, I was quick to like get on my bike and pee. So get on. By the time I was smoking weed, I had a scooter, a motorized scooter. It was before I had my license, so I would just, do my own thing, and I got into a lot of weird books because I was trying to understand how Bruce Lee used cannabis to become a better martial artist, or if that was even possible.
Yeah.
Not to cheat or anything, but because like I felt the energy shift. I felt something happening in my inner, my inner chi centers, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So I explored that, and I just kept going into my mind like that. And like The Way of the Shaman by Michael Harner,
Yeah.
that book kind of opened up some doors. And then I started reading Carlos Castaneda's books, and those opened the door a little wider. And then I started to try like different.
Dude, you're answering questions I haven't asked, so keep going. Dude, name a couple more people. That's my next question. Like, do you have any authors? What are their names?
Yeah, no, dude, I'll get to that. So those for sure. And then there's like some psychedelic experiences that I had. And I should say, like, throughout this, I was conspiratorial as well. I wasn't just like a hippie pot user. Like, I was also looking at like conspiracy material. It just wasn't as like, I was a lot more skeptical of it than I am now, right?
Absolutely.
I was intrigued, but I wasn't as like invested in it. Like if I had found InfoWars back then, maybe my life would be totally different, but for whatever reason, like I really, like underground rap taught me a lot about conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
I couldn't find podcasts. I didn't know that there were conspiracy podcasts out there. So, that was kind of where I was at. And I was listening to like, I would take like acid and listen to Alan Watts all night, because you can't
lucky
sleep when you take acid, So I'm just listening to like Alan Watts, like basically programming myself.
Yep, that's a good self-programming, I would say.
Well, yeah, and I was reading a book called Undoing Yourself by Dr. Christopher Hyatt, which, do you have that book?
No, you reminded me of a story, bro.
Oh, well, let's hear it.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
So I was in, so my wife just recently bought me an Alan Watts book because I had been binging hard on Alan Watts, the music genre, Alan Watts lectures, and then so I opened this book in the morning. I just wake up, and I'm living in Oregon at this time, and I'm baking and awaking absolutely harder than anybody I know. So I'm all of a sudden I read this book, and because I had been listening to so much Alan Watts, when I started to read the book, I read the book in his voice, and the words came out as if I was listening to a podcast. And it was one of the trippy. I was obviously super fucking stoned because I'm like, holy shit, Alan Watts is reading this book to my mind right now. So here's the part that's weird. My wife wakes up an hour later and was like, hey, were you listening to Alan Watts this morning? I was like, no, not at all. I was actually reading the book you got me. And so I just think it's funny, man, when I hear other people bring up Alan Watts and like you've listened to him, like there's some weird vibration throughout the world or anybody. Like, I mean, you don't even need to listen to him. You just need to know somebody who has and be in contact with him, and you're being affected by it. Like, that's how strong his vibration is to me, at least in that experience, because that's one of the first, I would say, real spiritual moments I had as an adult.
It seems like you and your wife are very tapped into each other. If she was sort of like, I mean, I assume by the way you told that story that she was like psychically hearing the voice that you were hearing as you were reading it. And maybe I'm wrong, but I assume you listened to me on the Grimerica show, and I remember kind of expressing the same thing, like, dude, how crazy it was when I found podcasts, because it brought books to life. You know, it brought them to life, And yeah, Alan Watts, I had like 2 of his books at that point in my life. I was getting books of his, but to be honest, I'm probably guilty of being a collector of certain books more than I am a reader for whatever reason.
Sure.
Because like I like buying philosophy books, but I have a hard time reading them. Like
Yeah.
I'd much rather just skim and scam and find what sticks out to
Oh,
me.
I
Which
can.
work, because it's not necessarily like a story where if you open to a random page you won't understand the context. So it's kind of like divination, like you just like pop open the book and see what message it has for you that day.
Yes, dude, you get it. You get reading. People are so, I think, confined to what reading is, and this is my difficult.
Schools
Like,
taught us to be like A, B, C, 1, 2,
yes,
3. Like,
yes. Like,
oh, you gotta start at page 1 and end at page 100 and
dude,
whatever.
you're gonna love my book. The instructions are: read it however the fuck you want. Roll a dice, pick a page, open it randomly. I don't give a shit. That's how reading really is. And I think if anybody like buys books, like I buy books or I've bought in books where like, oh, I bought that book for a paragraph.
Mm.
I need that paragraph just in case I need to talk to anybody. That's it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I've bought, I mean, like, especially with what I've been doing in the past year, where my girlfriend and I are trying to understand where we were born and know the whole history of it
Oh,
all the way through and through, like who lived here first, what happened when the colonists came, yada, 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 and how can we see that in the landscape? Because there's so many weird that just like are forgotten. I remember I heard about Gunji Womp in Connecticut, and recently a buddy on the Patreon, he subscribed and said, "Oh, I visited Gunji Womp from Canada, and he lives in Canada." I'm like, "Holy shit! People are driving all the way down to Canada to see Gunji Womp. Like, that's
wow.
interesting." And the reason I say that is because for folks who've never been here or don't live in Connecticut, like I would ask 9 out of 10 people in Connecticut if they even know what that is, and they'd probably say no. So
Yeah.
it's not like it's not like the Devil's Tower out there in your state. I think that's in Utah, where it's like people can find that. It's pretty well known. You see pictures of it on people's Instagrams and stuff. Like this place is the opposite. It's probably not
First time
as
I've heard about it.
yeah, it's not as ancient, I would guess, as maybe the Devil's Tower. That's like a geographic feature. Some people think it's an ancient tree stump, but
Likely, maybe.
the theory, the debate is still on with that one. But as far as Gunji Womp goes, there is a little bit of controversy because some people have speculated that like it was built by Celtic sailors rather than Native Americans. But as
Could
much
have been
as
built together.
yeah, I mean,
Why not?
that's totally not even unlikely. It's more probable than we think because the Celtic and the like people who lived up in Maine and New Brunswick, what's now New Brunswick, Canada, they were trading with each other. Like the Vikings, they would sail over to this part of the world and trade with the Native Americans. That's why the Micmac up in Canada there, they had like a flag. They're one of the only Native American groups that have a flag. Where do you think they learned about flags? It wasn't kind of an accident that they just invented the flag. Sure, that
There ain't no accident, dude. Are you kidding me?
yeah, sure that happens, in some cases, but
Oh,
then
fuck. No, it never happens, dude. People need something modeled.
and it's not even like it doesn't look like Native American art at all. It's like it's actually the exact same flag as the Templar flag, just reversed.
Amazing.
So you find these examples of weird, out of place history.
Oh, I
Maybe
love
went
those.
on a tangent there, but my point was kind of like these things are just all over the place, especially in New England. There's a whole map of obscured relics. And what I mean by that is like if you map them all out, you'd be like, whoa, how come more people don't know about this? But there are no maps about that kind of stuff, at least not popular ones, maybe for people like me who are into this stuff. But what really got me into it was just driving around during the pandemic because there was nobody on the road.
Beautiful
Gas
time.
was cheap. It was great.
America was better.
Yeah, it was for my niche interest, it was much better.
Yeah.
For a little while there, it was very cool.
I had a great pandemic.
Oh man, yeah, for a small majority of us, it was great, and it's hard.
If you never quit life, it was fine.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. A lot of people, they let fear shut down their life for a couple of years, you know. But
God
yeah,
bless him.
despite that, I just really got into meditating while listening to podcasts, and to the same effect that maybe you were describing with like listening to me talk and hearing like things sync up with my story and your story. That was happening for me in that way, but
Yeah.
also in less personal ways where it was like I was listening to a podcast and just happened to drive by something that was exactly what they were talking about. You know,
Bro.
maybe not the exact like example, but you know, St. John comes up in a conversation, and then I drive by St. John's Church. You know, those
Yep.
kind of things, like or Graham
Ineffable.
on the Grimerica show. Yeah, they're ineffable.
Yeah, that's the word, bro.
You know, these synchros. You know, I was about to mention the Grimerica show, and anybody who listens to that show
Oh,
and actually connects with it, I think starts to see the synchros, not just because they talk about it and they make it kind of
that's where
under.
my synchro stories started. I never had synchros before Gramerica because I mean, to me they were called coincidences or deja, like you know what I mean. But when I found out about, it, I'm like, oh no no no, I get it now. Look for the pattern. Look for the story. Find the story in your life.
It's
And
like a
yeah,
hidden language that, you know, they don't teach you because it's not relevant to the material world, but it's out there. It's something that people like Carl Jung have talked about. He made the phrase up, you know, he made the word up. You can,
yeah,
you, I mean, I always get spell checked when I try to type like any variation of the word synchronicity. There's no dictionary word for synchronous or you know, any other variation, because you know we like to play around. Synchromysticism, also
yeah.
not a real word in the dictionary, but that's just
That's
because
bullshit.
the dictionary is defined. Yeah, it's bullshit, but it's also defined by people who probably don't have the most grounded view of the world. Their view is grounded in this like altered sort of thing that I'm still struggling to understand fully. But yeah,
Me and you both.
that's kind of, I think, where I was going with initially your question.
I love it. Can I throw something different at you that
Yeah.
I think you might be a little bit more comfortable talking about, but I want to bring something new because a lot of my views on life are like I don't know. I want to bring some questions to the table. Like you understand that Ivy League schools, in particular, Skull and Bones, influences society. So my story and interest in that subject in Ivy League schools started when I wanted to learn more about the Illuminati, the elite, because I was like, oh, they have to have a common denominator. And the common denominator, when I found it, was the schools they went to. And for most people, they understand it's Ivy League schools. And then you can find even a further common denominator in the private schools they attend when they're young. And so Phillips and well now it's like kind of combined into one school, but Phillips Exeter Academy. This is from your neck of the woods, I believe, on the East Coast. These boarding private schools. Um, this is what I believe is the American breeding ground for. This is where, and there's before Skull and Bones. There's got to be something going on at this high school. Who are the alumni? Philip Ray, the director of the FBI. All the George Bushes. You got Zuckerberg. You got D'Angelo Thomas, I think is his name, the founder of Oracle, who now works at uh, Facebook. So you have like you just look at the alumni from these high schools, these two high schools, and then. To me, when I think of Skull and Bones, I think some of these individuals are pre-selected at these high schools. And one individual I'd like to bring to light who, because I don't know if he's Skull and Bones, but he became, and I think there's a few odd things going on, the largest contributor to Phillips Exeter Academy, Oscar Tang. He's a Chinese American, which I find interesting in this tumultuous time between America and China. Our number one private school's number one contributor is an individual from China who also went to Yale and got his bachelor's there. So Skull and Bones, lights flashing for me.
Well, I'll tell you what. I just Wikipedia'd it, and it says that Philip Exeter had previously been married to Sarah Gilman, wealthy widow of Philip's cousin. So he was the cousin of a man named Nathaniel Gilman, who is actually one of the three most influential Skull and Bones men in the early days of Skull and Bones, like the first 20 years of Skull and Bones. Nathaniel Gilman and two other gentlemen really like were, I mean, intrepid, like the definition of it. They went across the United States, literally across the United States. Nathaniel Gilman was like the first president of the University of California.
Wow.
He was the first president of Johns Hopkins. He helped with the
really?
Foundation. So yeah, dude, he is legit, and you just connected a dot here, brother. So thank you. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, because I had heard about these like prep schools. There's a couple in Connecticut. I remember wrestling some of them, and you could tell by the way these kids like held themselves, like when they're, when you wrestle, you got to weigh in and stuff. So
Yeah.
you get a good, like, you could size people up when you're a wrestler, especially at tournaments. You see how people act when they're when they're on their team and whatnot. So, but yeah, there's a couple prep schools that made us like feel like, oh, these kids are fucking douchebags.
Ooh.
And no offense, and I hope I'm not
Yeah.
breaking rules. Are we in the Patreon yet? Should we like say like, all right, we're about to go to the Patreon?
Well, the Patreon was at the half-hour mark, roughly, so we kind of transitioned. There's a tangential area in between there where I think there's a clean cut.
Okay.
But
Maybe edit this part in where I say, now we're going to the Patreon, motherfuckers.
I would love that. Yeah. And I actually, dude, if you wouldn't mind, I have to go use the restroom so fucking bad. Is this live on your end?
No, we're not live.
Oh, because if I was, I wouldn't mind if everybody knew how to go take a piss, but that'd be funny as fuck. Dude, honestly, so far, this fucking kicks ass, bro. You're amazing. And
do it. Go take care of that.
Dude, you're so fun. I'll be quick. I know you got other things lined up, I'm sure, and it's gotta be late for you.
It's all good.
Dude,
I got time.
Dude, you make my heart flutter. I love you. All right, man. Yeah, so it's crazy when you think about, I think, some of the private schools in America and what we just talked about. And I want to bring up a new one for you. And this private school is my favorite. It's in Switzerland, and it's called Les Roses. Halfway through the year, they switch their location, and they go, like, so when it starts to snow, they go to the Swiss Alps. Because why not, brother? And just to mention kind of a closing statement on the Phillips Exeter Academy private schools, it's about, if you want to send your kids there, it's about $60,000 a year. So there's a barrier, obviously, to attending some of these schools. I mean, I'm talking freshman year in high school, $60,000 for 1 year. And it's obviously cheaper if you live close. It's $40,000 if you just want to send your kid there. And I also want to close that statement. There's also, of course, when we talk about the Illuminati, we think about ritual sexual abuse sometimes, unfortunately. And there are some scandals associated with these schools between, teachers and students, which is unfortunate. But I just want to say some dots there between everything. But Les Roses, Switzerland, this is the place where the elite of the elite, the Rothschilds, send their kids to Les Roses private school. And this is in Switzerland. So, like, it's documented, the Rothschild alumni all go to Les Roses. John Lennon's kid went to Les Roses. Princesses of Saudi Arabia, Greece. I mean, you just name a country. You want to know where black nobility send their kids to school? It is at Les Roses in Switzerland. And it's all there. It's so funny how, and it's crazy. And we know this is part of, like, kind of, I would say, the elite, how they present their information. It's all in the public. This is all on Wikipedia. The alumni roster, the history of the school, a lot of these things. And it's nuts to think about all that. And so I want to know where your thoughts are kind of direct this conversation to the Skull and Bones, or anything you want to say about education or anything like that. I mean, I'm kind of lost, dude.
No worries, dude. It's maybe Skull and Bones' fault that we're all a little dumb. Like I have trouble learning this stuff too. So, and I also lose my train of thought while talking on podcasts. I've even done it during this very podcast. Maybe people couldn't even tell until I pointed it out, but here we are. So, when it comes to Skull and Bones, there was this sort of there was a movement in Connecticut, and this is sort of unrelated, but you'll understand why it's connected to Skull and Bones. So there was a guy who wanted to teach the deaf how to read, right? Because if you're deaf, it's very hard to understand words necessarily if you don't kind of have that communication. So there was this trouble. People had a hard time communicating with certain sectors of certain disabled people, and I'm almost certain a lot of the disabilities might have been because they were doing wild kind of crazy stuff back then to their work, like people working, they were maybe playing around with chemicals that they shouldn't have been, or who knows why this all of a sudden became a problem. But either way, there's this sort of type of education that was developed to teach the disabled called speak and spell. And it was exactly what you'll see in every children's book. Like every single children's book that's like designed to teach kids how to read implements this form of what they thought of as like an innovation. But when it's applied to someone who's not disabled, it actually inhibits learning, because it's
sight word recognition, right? Is that the main concept, where you learn to just recognize the word rather than the phonetic vibration of
or even to like boil it down to like, this is this, like what you see in the world and all that exists, right? So the only things that when you think about that on a deeper level, it's like, how do you, if you're teaching kids that only things that can be depicted through an image can name or can be defined, then that kind of limits your perspective in a lot of really deep philosophical conceptual ways. So this is what they implemented, and they don't implement it at a prep school like the ones you just described, and there's less expensive schools you can take your children to, like Waldorf schools and things like that try different styles that have been implemented later on by people like Rudolf Steiner, who, despite being very esoteric and whatnot, he made a pretty mainstream impact on culture. So those schools have their ups and downs, but I don't have kids, so I'm really out of the realm to talk about that at this point in my life. But as far as education goes, to say it really simply and plain, they dumbed us down.
Yes.
How did they do that? They had a variety of tactics, and not only did they dumb the majority of the population down, they created these schools where the majority got dumbed down, and then the elites were able to access a higher form of learning.
Yes.
Right? To further this divide that we now see, even like people that we mentioned earlier in the conversation talk about the middle class is shrinking. Sam Tripoli says it all the time. It's pretty soon it's going to be the super rich and the super poor, and some like fringe on both ends, but like the inside, the middle layer is going to be gone. There's nothing in between,
Absolutely.
Which I don't know how true that is, but I think that's what the global elite are aiming for. If they get what they want or not is up to us in some way.
Well, I resonate with that statement a lot, because when I think about education and you look at how it used to be, you could break it down to three things. You could get your education in a building, you could get your education from a book, or you could get your education from a person. But outside of that, good luck. But now, because of the internet and the way things are, you could be PhD educated and not have even graduated at college. You know what I mean? You could just really be that smart. And so because of that, the point being is, what's the incentive for getting a job if you're as smart as a PhD candidate, but you didn't graduate high school, but you dedicated your whole life to, like, Matt LaCroix? You know what I mean? I love him. He's not a PhD, but he is PhD. You know what I mean? Like, that's the reality of the world we grow up in. And people who are academics and are really smart have to adjust to this fact that just because you don't have a title doesn't mean you're not an expert. Because the world changed when the internet came into being. Like, education crumbled because you could really learn any way you wanted now, and you could advance just as quickly or faster than someone in a PhD program and learn so much more differently. So, like, the middle class, to your statement, crumbling, yeah, because it's fair game. Everything's fair game now. You could really be as smart as, I think, any college educated person at any level. You know what I mean? And that'd be up to your interest and your thing. So that's part of, I think, the whole demise of the middle class, and when everything is accessible in some sense. And, you know, what's the difference between me and Bill Gates, who gives medical advice, or me and a virologist, when the reality is the reason you're a virologist and you went to medical school is because you read a certain statement, you read a certain amount of words, you performed well on a certain test. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to you read something. That's all education is. You read something. So now everybody gets to read. It's like we used to be only the priests were allowed to read Latin.
Well, to take it back to books, that's why, you know, like I said before, I really just, even though I have all these books, I feel sometimes more like a collector, and that's not for some sort of like superficial reason, like, oh, look how many books I have. It's more because I think that eventually the books that I'm picking up aren't going to be available because they're going to go digital, and then they're going to be edited. And I'd love to have the physical copy when that happens, so I could show people like, hey, I have this book, and I went to Amazon and bought the PDF, and look how much stuff was edited out, or look how they rephrased this. So, you know, and even if that's not true and I'm just being super paranoid, well, yeah, I got a heavy load of books I got to cart around, but one day I'll have a nice house with a library, and this shit will be, you know, this will only be 25% hopefully of what I eventually have. But
Yes.
but yeah, you know,
It's
I'm
gonna
just
get bigger.
trying to create that Library of Alexandria while the rest of them are getting burned down, so to speak.
To that point, dude, you know about the Nag Hammadi scrolls, right? Or the Nag Hammadi texts.
Yeah.
And one of my little dreams in my life, like, I'm not Muslim, but I do identify with the trip to Mecca, like achieving some spiritual journey where you do something big in your life. And I'd like to.
Well, there's no, they don't own the concept of a pilgrimage.
Yes, that's the word, pilgrimage. But I'd like to make a pilgrimage where I take the books that I think, like maybe 20 or 30, and hide them in a cave. And I'd like that tradition to where everybody goes out and takes like some type of material and hides it in the caves. Because I don't know if something big will happen, but people need to start just hiding shit.
Yeah, I mean, geez, I hope I live in a house one day that'll be able to survive whatever goes down the same way a cave would. But yeah, I hear you. I definitely don't want to leave these books in some like barn somewhere.
Yeah.
Sure.
Or at least create a group of them. And I'm like, what would that be? What would the top 10 books, like if I had to leave to society, what are my Nag Hammadi texts? What are my 10 books? I'm like, do I bring in religious texts, or do I don't know, man. It's a difficult concept. But
your website, you have a bunch of books on your website, right?
yeah.
I'm not cool. I hope I wasn't confusing you with someone else, but yeah, I checked out your website and I saw a bunch of books on there that I have. As a matter of fact, the Dr. Dean Radin book stood out.
Yep.
I'm sure a bunch more that I can't think of off the top of my head, but yeah, man, I wish, you know, maybe we could get together after this sometime and talk about how we could create something like that on my podcast cooperative website. Obviously, I want to get your podcast on there. We could put the Provo Kid podcast and whatever our RSS feeds, other RSS feeds you have, if you have any others on there. But maybe that's the next move, is we create like an alt media united library Just put a bunch of books on there, and they don't. I mean, it's
Oh,
not like we gotta sell them. We could just link them,
yeah,
have it there.
absolutely.
You know, send me your list. I'll put a list together. Get a bunch of other podcasters to send me a list of books, and pretty soon we'll have a digital library that people can use as a resource. Like, not
Yes.
everybody has like the however many years you have and however many years I have of experience with these topics, and they want to get in, they want to dive in. And when I was younger, I would just search like some term on
Hmm.
Amazon or wherever the book outlet was, and then I would find related stuff and related stuff, and just keep
Yes.
going down that rabbit hole of what's related to this, and eventually find some cool stuff. But it would be great to compile them all together.
Yes. The Alt
And
Media United Library. And because here's the truth, to find some of these obscure books, like here's one that I recommend to you: Empires of Communications, which is Harold Enos, who influenced Marshall McLuhan, right? So it's like, I love Marshall McLuhan, but who influenced him? And sometimes it was a long rabbit hole to find uh, Harold Enos and Empires of Communication. And what that book is about, boiled down, is how did we create language, right? And so it's a beautiful book. And if you want to, and it's dry as fuck, and it's difficult to read because that's how some of these things are. If you want to learn about it, sometimes reading these things, it's just like, you're using hard words, dude. Or like, now you said this statement, I gotta spend 20 minutes on Wikipedia figuring out the context of what you just said.
but that's the beauty
Yeah.
in what this is, because pretty soon you go from one thing to another. And I avoid the term rabbit hole because it's the name of podcasts and it's just cliche, but that's what happens. You just go down all these
Hmm.
rabbit holes, whatever that means. And sometimes it's not even like conspiratorial stuff, and it's still cool to learn. You just find, for me, geography is always really interesting. I like learning about all sorts of different places. And Utah, I'll be there one day. But I like how
Certainly.
your show is kind of titled around the fact that you like where you live, because that's unique. How many people even have a podcast where you're from? I mean, the
Zero.
odds of that is probably, yeah, pretty slim. So unless you start like the Provo School of Podcasting, that'd be pretty dope. And then
That
you
would be.
just inspire other Utah. What do you call yourselves? Utah
Utahns?
Utahns. Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Mormon is just the shorthand.
the Utes. That's the name of a
Yeah.
tribe. The Utes. I think that's where maybe that comes from. But yeah, I've always been interested in this stuff, and one book has led to another. One big book for me that I would recommend to your audience and to you is A Secret History of the World. You probably heard me talk about that on other shows. It's by Mark Booth.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
and he's interesting. Apparently, he channeled guidance through this woman who channels an angel. So his
Wow.
research plus her insights, and normally I don't put a lot of weight into channeled books because you got to trust that the author trusts,
Hmm.
this being, and then you also have to trust whatever being is coming through that author. And
Yeah.
maybe that's just a metaphorical way of that person, like that's their pen name, or that's the identity within them that's able to write. Who knows? But either way, those books tend to be a little less um, factual when they are. It's synchronistic more than it is evident
Yeah.
of truthfulness. I think it's just something that everybody has an intuition and can tap into the akasha and that sort of thing. Not everybody can do it to the same degree as others, but I think it takes a lot of work to do something at that level. And maybe that speaks to certain authors, but then other authors like Abraham Hicks or whatever,
Yep.
they're just there to me. And I'm coming off of a podcast, group podcast, where I was one of a bunch of people asked to be a part of like a manifestation conversation. And I'm not
Nice.
like, I don't talk about how to manifest. I don't have like Mark's 101 on how to manifest out there, but that's what these other folks that were invited to be a part of, to some degree, that's what they're known for, or they go on podcasts and talk about it. And it's a part of my story, but I'm not like the guru,
Yeah.
I'm not anyone's guru. So I was a little skeptical. I like to be the contrarian. If I sense that there's sort of a mutual agreement going on, I like to poke holes in that and maybe find a place where people don't have a resounding agreement. Maybe that's a bad thing, but I
Yeah.
think sometimes people are too comfortable amongst like minds. So I tried to
Mm.
shake things up, and I don't know, as much as I was inspired by a lot of that law of attraction material and the channeling material,
Oh, I
I
know
don't
exactly
put a
what
lot
you mean,
of weight
brother.
to it.
Yeah. I know
But
exactly what you mean.
I will say stands out because he himself is not channeling, and I think that's why I enjoy his book so much, because
Mark Booth?
although
Yep.
he is being guided to some degree by the insights of whoever his co-author is, he himself is a researcher. So I think that's like why I like his book. And also he talks about the spiritual history of the world,
Mm.
not from a religious angle, but from like an esoteric angle. And you learn about all the different religions from a more secret sort of lens. Like, what were the priests really up to? What were the rituals that they were doing? How did
Yes.
known figures in history secretly get involved with these things? And when I say secretly, I mean like the general public doesn't think about Shakespeare as being a member of a secret society, or the
Yep.
general public doesn't think about, Isaac Newton or whoever else as being members of these like secret
Hey,
mystery schools.
Isaac,
So
he,
yeah.
he invented gravity, right?
Somebody did. I don't know if it was Isaac Newton, but
He
yeah.
brought he brought a new ton of information. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. No, he definitely. Hold on. He he definitely brought in the concept of gravity by that word, but whether he invented the force of gravity, that's definitely up for debate.
Hey, and there's a lot of things up for the debate, and I want to kind of get your if this is closing. I don't know how much time you have left, but
Yeah, time. I enjoy this, bro.
excellent.
I'll give you. We got on my clock over here. It looks like we've been going for an hour 10. So
Perfect.
I want to wrap this up at 11 my time, 9 o'clock your time. That'd be cool.
That'd be amazing. So I want to know your thoughts. And I've been listening to your podcast, and I've been tuning into the Tartaria conversation, and across the board. And as someone from Utah, I'm surprised when anybody brings up Tartaria, they don't always bring up the LDS Church. And maybe they're not they haven't been proselytized to. And I don't want to. I mean, I could if you want me. If you want to hear my LDS Church or Mormon story,
Yeah,
I don't mind explaining it.
tell
But
me.
you want to hear it?
Yeah.
So my parents, you classified them as. My mother went to Brigham Young University, which is the LDS Church. She went there for law school, and my father is probably he would call himself agnostic. But either way, my mother went to the BYU church for law school. And as a young boy, and before that, she wasn't Mormon. But here's long story short: if you go to the church, it's the church route for school. It's significantly cheaper. Let's say school costs $40,000 for law school. Typically at BYU, it might cost you $6,000. So it's nutty how cheap it is to be Mormon. So my mom's LDS. At the age of 8, I get baptized, but I don't go to church. I'm not forced into anything. It's more of a cultural upbringing. I don't know about Jesus. My parents don't tell me who God is, but I am technically a Mormon. But either way, I grow up. Everybody around me knows that
You're a
Jesus.
Jack Mormon, right?
You would call it that, yeah. But I've never even been to church really significantly. Like, not even my mom told me anything about Jesus or read the Bible to me. They didn't do nothing.
Huh.
My dad's like a Buddhist, if anything, and they didn't give a fuck about God or teaching me anything. They just wanted me to feel comfortable growing up in the culture, so they baptized me. Because when you grow up in Utah, it's who's your bishop, what ward are you in. I had friends even in elementary school who wouldn't come to my birthday party because I wasn't active. So
Oh,
although I was baptized and my mom went to be, it didn't matter unless my parents went to church and I went to church, they couldn't come over.
yeah.
Um,
And New England's kind of like that in some ways too, depending on where you're at, where it's like, not it's not like the whole state, but town by town for sure. Some towns are like that because, the folks who left this part of the country and went out and founded Mormonism, like they left an environment of like where everybody
yeah.
had like a really strict belief in something and they all disagreed, so they were like, all right, you can live over there, we're gonna live over here. And yeah, the Mormons actually, there's a guy who I just went to my phone, not because I wasn't interested, but because I'm looking for this guy. His name, I know his first name's Cody, but I would definitely love to help you get him on your podcast because I think you would just love talking to this dude. It's Cody Nakoni, and he knows everything about the Mormons, the
Okay.
history of the Mormons, and all the weird in and outs of the history of the Mormons, like how they allegedly were using psychedelics and how they, and
Sure.
this might get you in trouble with some. I don't want some
Oh,
of
no,
your
no.
friends not to tune in, but
I've already lost them.
so yeah, okay, so we're safe then. There was treasure hunting going
Oh,
on,
yes.
Freemasonry
I got,
involved, and
yeah.
all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of those things, but maybe Cody can fill in some
Oh,
blank.
I have a lot to learn, and I'd love to have Cody on. And the reason I bring this up is where I grew up, it was just kind of acknowledged that ancient civilizations have been in America, right? Like, it's not like, of course, what do you mean? And so now Tartaria is kind of making this wave in the conspiracy community. And I've always thought when I first heard it, was like, is this a psychological operation by the LDS Church? Because they have a lot to gain from people believing like, oh, there's an ancient civilization in America. Oh, here's a religion that talks about that. Here's Joseph Smith, who was a free Mason and also got, I mean, there's a ton of information that goes all between this, but a lot of times when people want to talk about Tartaria as a expansive global civilization and they want to talk about the things built in America, well, where I grow up, that's just accepted. Like, there were things here. It's in our book. We believe it. So it's funny. I want to get your thoughts. Like, have you had any conversations with people who talk about Tartaria or they bring up the LDS Church? Because I've listened to quite a few things, even Tinfoil Hat, but the LDS conversation seems to always be missing, which I find odd. Like, why aren't people connecting that dot?
Yeah, no, and I'm absolutely so grateful that you brought that up, dude, because I didn't really think about it like that. And when you said that, the first thing I wanted to ask you was like, so when you say that it's generally accepted that Mormons are like, yeah, of course there are ancient cultures here in America, their beliefs are they set to a set narrative or are they free to kind of speculate within that, like, or do people kind of have like an idea from the church like, okay, this culture came, then this culture came? Because I've heard a lot about like the ideas of like the afterlife and how everybody gets to be the like
Yeah.
leader on their own planet, and that was
Mm-hmm.
very like that was an idea that was popular in the 1800s, like this idea of reincarnating and possibly being able to reincarnate in another galaxy or in another planet on another planet. Because there was like, like the original sci-fi about people on Mars. People actually, to a certain extent, in public were like, well, of course there's people on Mars, there's
Yep.
people on Earth, you know. So when astronomers started like,
Naturally.
seeing these things through telescopes and would write about it, that's when people started to have all these speculations, and that's where a lot of the science fiction comes from. But it inspired a lot of the religious thinking at that time too. um but as far as like the ancient cultures, like unless they're just talking about the mounds, the mound builders, like I
Yeah.
would I would wonder like what their thoughts are on that and like how they place themselves in. Dude, right on with that, because I've been suspicious about Tartaria to some extent because it is so like feverish the same way flat earth can be, but
Yeah.
not everybody's like that. There's a lot of really cool people who believe in flat earth. I've met them. I've worked on a farm of flat earthers, so I have
Yeah.
a lot of respect
Me
for
too.
flat earthers, even though I generally try to be agnostic when it comes to that conversation, because I'm just curious. I
I'm
don't
a
want to say,
surveyor.
yeah, I'm surveying, I don't know for sure. So when it comes to Tartaria, I'm the same way. I try to be not one way or another, because some people do that and it's just obnoxious. It's not necessary.
Yeah.
If you have a point to make and you have evidence for it, then it doesn't need to be opinionated, because there's no amount of arguing or legal or linguistic trickery that you can do past your evidence. At that point, we're talking in a realm of evidence.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the evidence, then shut up. That's basically how I feel about it, so but
And
I'm
evidence is funny.
yeah, well, and I'm totally down to speculate
Me
too.
too.
It's just when somebody wants to tell me I'm wrong for not
Oh.
agreeing with them when when I would say shut up, not you or
Yeah.
anyone.
Yeah. Certainly.
You guys are all great, but when it comes to Tartaria, there has been a few people that have reached out through Telegram or YouTube with those kind of like really inflammatory, very inflammatory attitude. Like, oh, you're not working, you're not dedicated to the cause. You shouldn't talk about Tartaria. Like, okay, dude, chill the fuck out with that. You put a podcast together and then
Yeah.
talk shit. But and that's why I respect the fuck out of you, because I haven't seen many people that do a podcast the way you do, where you're like, what, 4 or 5 episodes a week? That's hustle, dude. I
Yeah.
love it.
It's
But
fun.
I'm having fun. But when it comes to like what I really think about Tartaria, I'll say it's interesting to think about. But my biggest reason why I'm still skeptical and I'm not a full-blown believer the same way I am about like Bigfoot or something like that, most people are like, duh. Like Bigfoot is kind of a lame one. I could have went with something cooler than that, but like Skull and Bones, I'm into that, and a lot of people wouldn't
Bro.
even believe that, but I believe Skull and Bones is doing some crazy shit.
It's a fact.
But when it comes to Tartaria, it's just, what's going on with the Native Americans?
Exactly.
They can't explain. It's like, okay, I'll admit that there were, the Vikings. I've already talked about that. Vikings in Canada. There was the Swedes came to Nuremberg and had a place called Nuremberg, which possibly is now Washington D.C.
Yeah.
There's evidence that the Chinese and other groups have been on the West Coast, and the Japanese made it all the way down to Peru. So we
Dude.
could talk about ancient civilizations here, but I don't buy that this whole thing was erased and replaced.
Yep.
And maybe that's just because I'm blinded by mainstream history, but
It seems like a limited hangout. You know what I mean? It seems like a time, like, I think you identify as a surveyor of conspiracy, and that's me. And I love people who dig into the trenches on a conspiracy, but there are no stop signs. There's no red lights for me in conspiracy. I love, and this is why I enjoy about your podcast. My family thinks I'm crazy, tinfoil hat. It's like, come share your trench. Tell me what you've dug into, because I can't dig into anything because I'm still looking. You know what I mean? And I'm always going to look. And so that's how I think about things. It takes so much to dig into anything and say, this is end all be all about anything, whether it's flat earth, whether it's Tartaria, JFK. Like, I don't have time to dig into the trenches. I love learning about it, but I love, I'm a surveyor. I want to just keep going and keep going. And I feel like if you spend too much time in Tartaria, you don't learn new things, right? But I will say, I'm just saying, I think it's more beneficial to go broad than deep when you want to be conspiratorial and things. Because if you go deep, sometimes you miss seeing the forest, I guess, with the tree. Or I don't know, man. If that makes any sense.
I think there's no. You're making sense. I think there's merits to both approaches.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
and I've gone deep on certain topics. So,
Because
you
it's
know,
fun, and that's when I think you probably should go deep. Like I think one of the things that I love to just I'll always entertain a conspiracy theory about 9/11, right? Like whether it's the idea that the buildings were I mean demolished by art students, or it was high energy weapon, or a drone, whatever the conspiracy is. I'm attached to always learning about stuff like that, and because to me it really doesn't matter how the job occurred because it was inside. You know what I mean? People are so worried about how it happened. I don't really care, but I love hearing about everybody's speculation. But it did happen, and it was allowed to happen. So therefore, hey, guilty. I would say the government is. You know what I mean? And
yeah, and that's like that's a good time where a guest is helpful to your point because I don't have all of the detailed evidences to go and be like, yeah, 9/11 happened this way, and
mhm.
I am confident. But I can say from a surveyor's point of view, based on all the information that's out there, that the official story is bullshit, right?
Yeah,
So to your point, yeah. But yeah, I mean, with some topics, I go really deep. I mean, one topic that Tara and I have researched it, like I was saying earlier, is like the Native American culture here in New England that's been
mm,
forgotten and basically pushed out, to some extent, at least from the popular view. There's still like organizations and experts and all sorts of people. Some of them I hope to have on my podcast, but yeah, a lot of these like really cool megalithic sites, they're not considered you know, the same way like Stonehenge or something like you see on Ancient Aliens is, even though they're equally significant. Like I've seen some stones that are huge, like they would be like 4 or 5 tons, and they're perched on top of 3 or 4 stones that you and I could pick up with our hands and maybe like lift over our heads and for a few seconds. They're not tiny stones, but they're like small enough to where you're like, how the hell did this giant boulder get perched on top of
yeah,
it?
and
You
nobody wants to
know?
talk about it.
Well, yeah, and there's a
Yeah,
lot of them that in the Native American culture were
we.
significant, and there's all these different rock structures that you can find. And my girlfriend and I have filmed some of them, and some of the videos are on my Rockfin, some of the videos are on the Instagram. But yeah, the stuff you can find is really wild when you take this approach, and I'm sure Utah is no
Oh,
different. But the problem is what Tartaria could do, to your point about limited hangout, because I was interested in Tartaria for some time, and I was looking around like, oh, that could be Tartarian, that could be Tartarian.
I still
But
do.
yeah, it's like, does it necessarily, just because a building looks like you don't know how it was built, does that mean that like it was built by free energy or some improbable means? No, it just means that you need to learn more about how architecture is done,
Yes.
And when I did that, I realized like, oh, okay, these things can't be necessarily Tartarian unless there are some things that are being left out. There's a lot of things within the Tartarian narrative that are like, whoa, how do you explain that? But, to the point about like, oh, cities that are getting burned down, what if those are all insurance scams?
Yeah.
And that's why they're burning shit down because there's money involved in the for the property owners and not the renters,
Yeah.
right?
They did use dynamite during the San Francisco fires to put out the fires. So that's a
Oh,
weird little fact. Yeah. When you
that sounds
think
very effective.
yeah, dynamite to put out a fire that's spreading. Makes sense. But in connection to what you're saying about where you're from and kind of the things you
Sounds like
see,
it would just spread the fire even farther.
dude, it's a public record.
Sounds like
they,
exactly what you would need to blow up a bunch of dynamite was a fire.
yeah.
But
So here's what I was gonna say. Like, are you familiar with Lake Powell at all in southern Utah?
I've heard of it. I think
So
there's like, is that near the Skinwalker Ranch or am I confusing things?
Skinwalker Ranch, I would believe would be farther north.
Oh,
It'd be
okay.
northern Utah, but southern Utah, next to
Hmm.
the Arizona border, There's this place called Lake Powell, which is a huge tourist destination, and it was dammed up. But before it was dammed up, it was like you can imagine deep canyons, and in these canyons, it's huge. Swaths of history where Native Americans spent time in these areas, lived in these areas, and it's just weird. This is a point to Tartaria of like, where'd they cover up history? In Utah, a quick little example I would point to of in support of Tartaria, because that's how I like to think sometimes, is they covered up that whole, I think it was called Glen Canyon, and so they just dammed it up. And so all that Native American evidence, all the history was just washed away. And so that's just a part of Utah history and 75% of Utah is owned by the federal government as well. So like some states, when you look at like, what's going on in Utah? Why is there so much fucking land the federal government owns? It doesn't make sense because...
well, Skull and Bones definitely played a part in that. According to my research, the guys like Nathaniel Gilman that helped spend money on that boarding school that we talked about earlier, these guys sort of innovated that concept of colleges buying up land for the state for research purposes and for resource purposes. So, and when I hear about the dams, it makes sense in a sort of capitalistic way that they would want, because think about it, when you're in a desert, you only really have a couple options for a dam, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't just recreate a canyon. So, and there's probably only so many canyons of that size to create a lake that they could then use for power source, which is way more important to them than ancient artifacts. So if they hush it up and lie about it, then nobody can argue about the dam being built there. And then the people who invested in that idea can get their money back from the, money that goes into building and powering, all of that. So it's a racket. It's always a racket. That's what like Edward Abbey was writing about in the West, and how they ruined the West and they ruined the wildness of the West. And it was such a short period of time.
Like it is nuts, man.
Yeah, only 100 years ago this was happening, and 100 years before that it was nothing like that. It was 200 years ago where you live was so different. That's not the case for where I live. I mean, where I live 400 years ago, right? And there's a big difference there.
You got townies that have been there for 400 years. That's the difference. You know what I mean? Like, there's people in your neighborhood like, yo, I got family.
Yeah, there's a couple people that'll make you scratch your head like, geez, where did they come from? But yeah, I think that's the difference, is like the ancient history here has been obscured, and maybe it was more popular to research that kind of stuff in the 1800s here, and that's why it inspired them to cover it all up when they settled the West.
Yeah.
So that's kind of part of what I'm looking into with Skull and Bones. But yeah, it is kind of wild to think about how different the places we are in were only, half of a century or half of like 1,000 years ago, which isn't really that much time in the scope of history.
Certainly.
Yeah, it's just wild.
It is, man. And there's a funny thing about Connecticut, and this is a question I mean, it's kind of odd. It's a weird thing to bring up, but I had a debate a long time ago. It seems silly now, but in college, and it was with my friend who was from Connecticut at the time, and he was convinced that these schools, the public schools, the colleges on the East Coast were just better. And I wanted to get kind of your opinion on just your education, your upbringing. Did you think you had a good education? I don't know if it was public or private, but just on the East Coast, would you say East Coast provided you a good education? Or what are your thoughts about the education you were provided by the state, which in my opinion, and I've made this is my belief, education is compulsory slavery, right? I think the United States is a wage slave empire, and the fact that you are mandated to give your kids to the state at the age of 6 is a sign of slavery. And that's all a big conspiracy in my opinion. But So,
where did you go to school with that gentleman?
huh?
You said you went to school with somebody who was a
Santa Barbara City College. So I spent 2 semesters in Santa Barbara with a few different wild people.
okay. Santa Barbara, California. That sounds fun down there. Probably a lot different than Utah.
Oh, it was wild, man. It was, I had no clue when I went too. It was one of those weird things where the only reason I went there was I had dreams of playing college football. And the college I was at, University of Utah, it became apparent that you're born to play D1. You know what I mean? And so I don't have the body. My friend said, come play at this local community college. They suck. I go out there and I'm like, holy shit, it's Santa Barbara. And I was really just ignorant at the time when I went there. So, but yeah, it was wild, dude. But yeah, my friend was from Connecticut and he was one of the wildest people I've ever met, but he was confident. Connecticut and the East Coast had the most educated people and they had a good grip on education and how to raise a mind. And I disagreed. My argument was, look at, I said, no way, dude. West Coast is way better with education. I was brainwashed then, so I totally have different arguments and philosophy, but
I'm not offended. I'm not going to argue for the East Coast just because I'm from the East Coast. But I've never been to the West Coast, so I can't tell you what it's like. But when it comes to my education, it was public school through and through, all the way up to community college. It was public, I'm pretty sure, if that counts. I don't know.
yeah, it's all state funded, right?
Yeah, so it wasn't like Yale or something where it's like a private institution, but I was in the same city as Yale, and I grew up not too far away from there. So I saw the contrast between where I went to school, community college as well, compared to Yale,
Yeah.
which is the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, there's definitely statistical evidence for what your friend was saying. It's not really debatable. It's just a fact that, I mean, 10% of all U.S. diplomatic people have been not only a part of East Coast, but Yale. I mean,
See,
and
that's
Harvard
the best.
is probably right up there too. So I don't think your friend was like going out of like that far out of the realm of the truth by saying that, but it's not something that I'm gonna debate because I'm jaded, you know.
Yeah.
Your views have shifted.
He shifted my views though, so I desperately after that wanted to.
There's a residual value in being born in an area where that kind of education is going on, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, because the people that were my teachers had a higher chance of being a part of maybe a better school than somebody in like Oklahoma or even Utah. I mean, it sounds like a lot of people are pretty Mormon over there. I don't know what that does to the average person, but you know, I don't know, man. But yeah, it definitely made a difference for sure. But I was always kind of jaded because I felt left out. You know, I'm not from a rich family.
Yeah.
I have family members who have like money, but that's not my mom and dad. You know what I mean? Like my mom and dad are very much 9 to 5, still working to this day. You know, into their 50s and 60s, they're going to be working. You know, and
both mine into their 70s.
Oh man, you had older parents then, huh?
Yeah, they're both working.
Yeah.
Dude,
well,
that's their life, dude. They don't.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think my grandmother worked until she was 70, and my other grandparents who are still alive, they both worked until their 60s. So yeah, that's pretty common. But
I think that's part of conditioning, though, from their education and their upbringing. Like America, you work for the economy. Like, I think my parents are brainwashed, dude.
Yeah, no, I don't plan on having that trajectory at all. I mean, the podcast thing is totally different than anything anyone in my family's ever done.
Absolutely.
I don't have any like family members that are doing anything in like entertainment or even anything that would like lend itself to me doing what I'm doing now. So I've just kind of done this because it's what I'm doing. But
it's
yeah,
completely
when it comes
different.
to learning, it was like a lot of there was a lot of resources but not a lot of people to point you in the right direction for me. So I just kind of figured it out on my own, and we already talked about the books and stuff, so you can kind of tell like, yeah, all right, maybe that's probably not possible. Like the books that I have, sure, anybody can order them online now, but a lot of like the used bookstores that I go to have like occult book sections, like
Yeah.
occult books or weird conspiracy theories. I don't know. I've been around, some parts of the United States, and it's not like that everywhere. Like I went to Indiana and they had like fucking 8 sections of shelves for just Christianity, and over here there's maybe like 1 or 2, unless you're at like a church bookstore.
We
But
have the
like,
LDS section at every bookstore, and
oh,
it's deep, homie. It's
yeah,
just like, hey, every type
yeah.
of LDS book you want to have.
It's probably required, like, oh, you can't open a bookstore that doesn't have this
Oh,
type of material in it in some cities, I'm sure. But
yeah.
yeah, that's the kind of thing. It's like there is like a sort of pagan, witchy type of culture in New England.
Oh,
So
lucky.
so I had like access to like the crystal shops and stuff,
Mm.
and that kind of, I don't know if that exists everywhere, but that's cool. Like if I didn't have access to that, I might not be Mystic Mark. I might just be like something else Mark, who knows? But like that was a big part of it. But yeah, I think anybody can learn if they're spending enough time reflecting and they're doing that in nature, because there's something about nature that teaches and speaks to you. Like my learning isn't from outside, it's from inside.
Mm.
And where do I
Oh, wow.
connect
Bro,
myself the most is
preach.
nature.
Dude. So to that whole point, yeah, I got a disclosure. I got a degree, master's degree in teaching, and I became disenchanted with teaching when I realized that all learning is individual. Like everybody's journey, like you can delude yourself sometimes into being a teacher, but I think a good teacher just puts obstacles in front of someone, and they learn how to go over those obstacles. And all learning's individual, but what you just said there resonated with me so much, man. Like uh, everything, I would say, on a learning level, ultimately becomes individual, but you're conditioned at a young age to think, if you ask a child, where do you learn? They say school. Where do you learn? In a class. Where do you learn? That's like, but the reality is you're always learning. You're learning every moment. You're learning how you respond to someone when you're talking to them. You're learning how you respond to food when you eat it. You're learning how you respond uh, to a certain amount of sunlight in a day or a lack of sleep. You're always constantly learning, and it never stops. And it's such an individual thing, where sometimes I feel like people think they stop learning because they're waiting for a teacher. And the real teacher is always like just themselves. Like that's the ultimate guru. Like you, dude, you're the guru.
Yeah, nobody teaches you how to learn. They just expect you to know sometimes. So yeah, I hear that, man, for sure.
Absolutely. And throughout the journey of learning, it's a fun thing when you realize like, oh, I don't need a class, I don't need a teacher, I just need my own interest and my own drive in pursuing something. And that's where I find, research or diving deep on something, like where do I like to dive deep on? Thinking about those private schools we talked about earlier. Like that's my main, like if I have time that I want to learn about, I go learn about private schools, because that's where I used to think I'd want to send my kids. But then when you learn about it and you realize, oh no, that's a racket. That's just saying I want my kid to be a senator or this or that. And the reality is, I think you want your kid to be themselves, and the Illuminati or whatever people want to call them. And I think the reality of growing up in a family like that sucks, because like if you're Donald Trump's son or kid, I don't really think they're free, right? Like they're just following patterns or steps or roles. And real freedom, I think, comes from outside structured educational settings. It comes from outside of colleges, outside of public school. And if you look at some of the greatest minds ever, they didn't go to college, they didn't go to public school, they didn't go to law school. They just took life by the horns, so to speak, and did what they wanted. And it's funny because I look at my life, and some of my most successful friends are people who just really did what they wanted to do. And the people who, there's other people who are quote unquote successful, but I look at their life, and to me, it's hard to resonate with the choices they've made because it seems like they're going through routines that I don't identify with. Routines where they're participating in belief systems or rituals where I would say it's like, I don't know, they're sacrificing themselves to the golden calf that is America. They're giving everything that like their heart and soul to America. They support Ukraine. They love Fauci. They're working all day. Their kid goes to public school. Then they get home. Their kid watches the prescribed TV shows. Then they go to bed. Like, you know what I mean? Just the ideal. I would call that's the new white picket America. And it's funny to see that play out as well. And a lot of those people are quote unquote educated, or they go in the system. But more and more, I think educated people, and we call back, dude. Education's such a blurred line. You don't need schools. You don't need a building or a book or a person. It's so wide. The internet's done something crazy, I think. It's really opened people's minds to learning at their own rate, at their own pace, and it's kind of beautiful to see. To me, some people might be intimidated by, other people learning. Like, I think it's good when people learn how crazy the world is, or this is corrupt, or that is corrupt. Like, to me, knowledge shouldn't be. I think there's this misconception where conspiracy theorists or people who think they know something, like try to hold on to it. We're trying to give it away. We want everybody to know, and I think it's beneficial at the end of the day to kind of be aware of all this information. But it's hard, man. It's hard to really break down all these barriers and this conditioning of going to school from the time you're 6 to 18 years old, and then all of a sudden you hear Alex Jones or Mark the Mystic talking about gematria or Tartaria, and you're like, oh man, I don't know, dude. I just want to believe. Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Native Americans were this, and the world's structured this way, World War II was this, and people are so comfortable, I think, in the narrative, or have been. They've been lulled to sleep, but the internet broke that, and it's washed, I think. And people talk about the awakening. The awakening is just realizing there's lies. My parents, as cool as they were, as old as they are, they were 100% brainwashed. And they're hippies, dude.
I hate that, man. Yeah.
It's crazy. But they didn't have the amount of information I went through by the time I was 25. Like my dad, for example, he was a PhD student at Oklahoma. And this is a cool story he shared with me. The class was so competitive, the only way to learn was to go to the library. And one of the other students got a razor blade and cut out the pages of the book so nobody else could score as high on the assignment. But that's the way learning went, right? Where you would limit someone's ability to learn by razor blading a page out of a book in the library. But you can't do that anymore, right? And it's cutthroat. And my dad was a PhD student when that was happening, and whatever age he was, and my life at his age, I'm learning so fast on so many different levels. Like, you couldn't limit me by cutting a page out of the book, right?
Was it that they were cutting it out to stop other people from learning it, or were they just really dedicated and they wanted to read that like in the bathtub?
Exactly, maybe.
Like they just needed to hang on to those pages for whatever reason.
It's a nutty story, right?
Selfish person, but
yeah. And
definitely seems like you can interpret it without the malicious intent.
Yeah. The best part about that story is that person's kind of rather famous. They did some ape studies.
Oh wow.
But
so he knows the person did it for that reason.
Yeah, they got caught. The whole situation was like, oh yeah, professor, I couldn't do the assignment. Someone cut the pages out of the book.
Jane Goodall.
Yeah, around that. Yeah, my father worked around that. It wasn't Jane Goodall, but around that kind of thing.
Like her.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but things were competitive, and people were. My point in full circle is people used to restrict knowledge, restrict information, and this day and age, I don't think that's possible. You can't do that. And what's happening is people are just growing and growing, as Sam Tripoli says, and their understanding of the world and how things work or how things don't work. And I think it's such a beautiful thing to see the breakdown of people's conceptions, and from my family, I feel like I've changed some of their views in the past few years. They thought I was crazy, and now they're starting to see like, oh, I'm not as crazy. I was right about a few things, and it's funny. Like I'll throw this to you. Like, what happens when your family starts to resonate with you? Has there been anybody in your family who's converted to you? We're like, oh, Mark's not crazy. Mark's right.
No, but maybe I didn't give them the chance to tell me. But no, it's funny because someone in my family listens to my podcast, but they don't absorb it. And when I ask them why they listen, because I had a feeling that they're not listening, like actually listening, they're like, no, we just like to hear your voice. We just want to check in on you and make sure you're doing all right. So that's nice. Shout out to them. Yeah. But I don't like that. I'm like, don't listen just because, like, actually try to like absorb something, I guess. I don't know. But no, unfortunately, no. But I'm not like, I don't
it takes time.
That close to most of my like cousins and whatnot. Like I said, one of my cousins actually in Salt Lake City. I don't know how close that is to Provo, but
40 minutes, brother.
Yeah, so I have family all over the place, and I don't know. I mean, if some of them tune into my podcast, only one of them has admitted it. So I don't know.
That's amazing. And to me, honestly, the same story. I've only made a breakthrough with one person, and everybody else, like I have a brother, and me and him couldn't be more opposite. Like the exact opposite. Like there are no two bigger opposites than me and my brother.
To be fair, I didn't think about my sibling, my sister, and she's definitely like, she's with me in a lot of respects. Like, she just doesn't care enough to like know it all, but she has like a pretty strong common sense for what is and isn't, and she lives in New York City, so she has to deal with a lot of bullshit. So, but yeah, no, I mean, I think with family, like my dad watches Fox News, so we agreed when it was like, oh yeah, Trump's kind of interesting, right? Like, yeah, I didn't like outwardly support Trump, but I definitely liked him better than the opposition.
I resonated with him 100%.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna go and say he's like not like a politician. I don't like politicians, but yeah, Trump was definitely funny, and it was crazy that the media hated him as much as they did.
That was the best part. It was how much he pissed people off.
That's what really made me think twice about him. But so that we saw eye to eye on that. But no, not really. I mean, I think they just listen just because if they want to be supportive, which is nice. So, yeah. But no, I don't think they would really even want to have a conversation about half the stuff, or even like 80% of the stuff that I talk about on the show. And it's not that big of a deal anymore, because now I have other really cool people to talk to about this all the time. Yeah. And my girlfriend's into this stuff too, so she doesn't think I'm crazy yet. So.
Certainly, I'm in the same boat with you.
Yeah, so I'm sure that day may come. But yeah, I definitely don't really care either. I'm not here to be
to that statement. To not care. Yeah, to be a guru, like that's where I'm at. And I used to be at a point to where I wanted to be like, oh no, you have to see it my way. But once you find, I think, balance in who you are or the way you think, you're like, no. You want to look at it that way. You want it to be that way. All right, go ahead. You know what I mean? Even if you're family or not. Like my brother, who me and him don't see eye to eye with. It's like I'm not trying to send him the information that I think will change his views. I'm just like, all right, you know what I mean? Like it's almost like talking to an atheist about trying to be religious, or a Democrat about trying to be Republican. There's just some realities where you're not going to break through on a lot of things with some people. So, and if you can just accept that, I think you get a lot farther in your own personal peace and happiness. And stop. And old Bible quote, dude, don't try to cast pearls to the swine. You know what I mean? Because you get frustrated when you do that. Nothing's more frustrated than when you're trying to help someone, or like, oh, let me bestow these wisdoms or pearls of knowledge and appreciate it. And most people don't. And it's nuts, man. So I gave up on that. And I used to be the person saying, you gotta know this, you gotta know that, dude. And then I said, fuck it, dude.
I hear you.
Fuck it, dude. I'll just do me, dude. You do what you want to do. Fuck it, right? And then that's what I think everything I'm doing has become, is just like, you know what? Fuck everybody else. I'll just make the things I want to make, and kind of like a freak show. Like I hope someone like stops and looks and stays. You know what I mean? Like that's my goal. Is just to do what I'm gonna do, and you know, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. Cool. Yeah, whatever, man. That's the whole goal, is just to enjoy, I think, my worldview, or the freedom of thinking what you want. Nothing's better, and I think you could agree with this. Nothing's more freeing than being crazy, I guess, right? Nothing's more freeing than just being like, you know what? I will give myself freedom to have the craziest thoughts. I'll think the world's flat. I'll think it's a simulation. I'll think Tartaria is real tomorrow. I'm going to allow my mind to just think whatever it wants, because I don't like, guardrails. And I think it's one of the most...
Push it even further. I would say that, it's crazy that the world thinks that that's crazy to be that open-minded. So don't, if you are in that group and you think that it's crazy to be that open-minded, then just try it. Like, have you tried it?
Yes.
That's kind of like what I would say to that. And also, you never know how interesting life can be until you start questioning the things that you've been, told are true.
Absolutely.
Totally find out that there's evidence to suggest all sorts of things that you wouldn't hear in your mainstream school or from mainstream sources. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I want to break this last segment of our time together down in two things, because I'm notifying the time concept. This is a big thing for me, time. And I just want to break bread with you on this issue. I think time isn't linear. So to me, I can revise my history in some sense, and I can make my future in some sense, because it's important to live in the moment. But I think when you break down the fact that time's not linear, you can make time and your reality anything that you want. And so I would just like to hear your thoughts on time. Have you ever caught it? Do you know what time is? Or do you believe in the calendar? Do you have a conspiracy about time? Is it just made up to make us do things or think things? That's one of the things, my homebrew conspiracy I'm working on, is I think time's fake. And I think it's not quite what we think it is. And the clock and the structured system is just designed to condition us. So I want to hear your thoughts on time as we're running out of time.
So, yeah, I would say it's definitely something that we could spend a whole lot of time talking about. But it's just about being in the moment. I think that's what's so cool about being on podcasts like this one. I mean, time's kind of flown by. You really get a sense of what the moment feels like when you really get into a conversation.
Yeah.
So I would tell people, like, something that I said on Sam Tripoli's Zero Spirituality podcast a while ago. It's on Rockfin, and he's got an RSS feed for it now.
Was it with positive thinking?
That was one episode. I've done 5 now.
All right.
Altogether. I think I'm the champion on Zero. I'm actually the only guy who's ever done every single one of Sam Tripoli's podcasts.
The cycle.
Yeah, I mean, technically, I haven't been, because I haven't been on Cash Daddy's Broken Sim or Conspiracy Social Club, but all of his other shows I've done. So I've done, I think he called it like the 3-ring champ or something like that. But you have to go in more like a 3-ring circus sometimes. But
I love it.
I would say my thing about time is when you have presence in the present, you receive the presence of presence.
Yes.
So let me run that back. When you're present in the present, you receive the presence of presence.
Yes.
So, it's just kind of like a little tongue twister, and maybe it doesn't make sense as much as I think it does. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it. It's like when you are able to remain focused on your purpose and your goals, but it's rooted in the moment, you're going to accomplish those things a lot easier than someone who's thinking about the future and getting anxiety, or thinking about the past and experiencing regret. Because if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing it right. So you're going to have things that you regret, but the point is to learn, turn, and burn. Like learn what you did wrong and turn over a new leaf. And when that goes wrong, burn it and start over again and learn what you did wrong, and that's kind of what I was telling you before about the podcast, the beginning of this conversation. Like, if you listen to my show, you could see the evolution of the podcast. The first 10 episodes sound nothing like the latest 10 episodes.
Yeah.
And then, like, from episode 1 to 50 are all kind of like low production quality. It's not the best.
It's still good though, brother. I listened to him today. I was impressed.
Thank you. And it gets better over time. So if people really
that's
dig
art.
the show, go into the archives. But yeah, I think that's kind of time plus mind equals art. I think that was the phrase that I heard somewhere. But yeah, that's kind of like where we're at. It's like with the podcast, it's it's an art form.
It is. It's absolutely. And as I just want to let everybody know, you can find Mystic Mark at My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Patreon.
You just go myfamilythinksimcrazy.com and get all of those things.
Yes. There you go. And anything else you'd like to add before we close out?
No, that's it, dude. If anyone made it this far, unless you're going to edit it into the first half hour, then thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the Provo Kid. And since you're on Patreon already, go over to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy Patreon. We got a Patreon too. And that's it, bro. Thank you so much for having me, dude. I appreciate it. And I hope a bunch of people sign up for this Patreon, and I'm going to plug it on my show. And if you let me, I'll post it on my Patreon so people can get a sense of your show, and then maybe they'll add another show to their monthly Patreon. Because for anyone listening, that's kind of what I think is a real secret as to how my show got kickstarted. Because way before I ever met Sam or talked to Sam, I was supporting podcasts on Patreon, the Conspiracy Guys.
Dude, I wanted to talk about them. We'll get.
Yeah, dude. Well, we'll do another podcast, I'm sure, someday, maybe sooner than later. I'd be down. Just let me know, hit me up. But yeah, dude, this has been fun, and yeah, everyone supporting, good karma on you. Keep it up.
God bless you. Thank you so much, Mark. And everybody go give Mark a follow, like, subscribe, and man, couldn't thank you enough, Mark. God bless you. And I'm going to have to get some details from you after this. And for everybody, the music in the beginning was Hollow Hill, and the music on the end will be Hollow Hill. They're a local band out of Utah. So God bless you all. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Conspiracy Heroes. This is my hero, Mystic Mark. God bless you all. Thank you so much for tuning in.